So today we start Perek Daled. In Perek Gimel, we talked about the constitution of the neshama. The neshama is divided basically into two parts. Part number one of the neshama is seichel, and part number two is midas, which means to say that who am I? I am my thoughts, my perceptions, my ideas, the way I view everything in my unique way. That's my seichel. No two people have the same seichel. No two people think the same way, experience things the same way, view things the same way. And then there are my feelings. And those are two different things. There's my perceptions, my understandings, and there are my feelings. That's who I am. That is the essence of who the neshama is. I should point out that although over here in Tanya, Rabbi talks about the essence of the neshama being seichel and midas, intellect and emotions, my ideas and my feelings. In other places in Chassidus, including the Alter Rebbe himself, there's a mimer which the Alter Rebbe in the Likutei Torah, where the Alter Rebbe says that although that I wrote in Tanya that the essence of the neshama is seichel and midas, is intellect and emotions, that's not really the case. Really, the essence of the neshama transcends and is much deeper and much higher than my feelings and my thoughts. However, for the purposes of Tanya, and for the purposes of what the Alter Rebbe is trying to accomplish in Tanya, and the Alter Rebbe in Tanya is dealing with the conscious me as opposed to the unconscious or subconscious me. So for our purposes, the essence of the neshama is the seichel and the midas. In Perek Daled, in chapter 4, I took myself, you weren't there?
With the cup, I was downstairs.
Wow.
Maybe make the mitzvah.
Thank you. In chapter 4, the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce a new part of the neshama, and those are the levushim. The neshama has garments. I know that we discussed in the end of Perek Beis, the end of chapter 2, we discussed about some sort of spiritual levush that the neshama has, but we're talking here about something different. The neshama has three garments, and these garments are machshava, dibur, and maisa. Thought, speech, and action. Meaning to say, I am my ideas and my feelings. But what are the vehicles through which I express and I reveal my seichel and my midas? How do I reveal that which I'm thinking? How do I reveal that which I'm feeling? So there are three levushim, there are three garments that the neshama has, and these are vehicles through which the neshama reveals itself. And they are thought, speech, and action. And these three are very different one from another. Thought is how I reveal myself to myself. I know that sounds a little strange, but when let's use the example of a feeling. I have a feeling in my heart, and sometimes we're struck by a feeling. How do I process that feeling? How do I myself know and understand and fully appreciate that feeling? Is when I think about it, and when I use my mind and I process it. As long as it's in my heart, it remains elusive and in a way hidden even from myself. I feel it. But how do I when I put words to it in my mind, and when I can quantify it and fully understand it, that is revealing that midah to myself. The same thing is also ideas. I can have an intellectual idea, but how do I access that idea? By thinking about it, by putting it into actual words in my mind. So when I think about something, that's me communicating to myself. That's my deeper part of me, which is my seichel and my midas, my understanding and my feelings. I communicate them to myself, and I process them myself through machshava. So again, the first garment that we have is machshava. That's the first vehicle how the soul expresses itself. how the neshama expresses itself, and in this way the neshama is expressing itself to itself. Then there's dibur. Dibur is speech, which is when I want to express myself to someone else. What am I expressing to someone else? My seichel and my midas. I'm expressing to someone else that which I'm thinking and that which I'm feeling. So machshava is expressing myself inwardly. Dibur is expressing myself outwardly. And then the third garment is maisa, is action. Now this one is a little different, because when you act, when you do something, you're not directly expressing that which you're thinking or you're feeling. At the same time, however, our actions absolutely are expressions of what we think and what we feel. Everything that we do, it's either because I understand that I have to do this, or because I feel that I want to do this. So let's use an example of love. So if I feel love towards someone, so when I'm thinking about that in my head, and I'm thinking about all the wonderful traits of the object of my love, and thinking about all those wonderful things that I'm thinking about my beloved, that is machshava. So that is the garment number one. When then I use my words to express my love to the person who I love, that is dibur. That's me expressing my feelings and my thoughts to someone else. And then when I go to the store on Friday and I buy the flowers and I bring that to the person who I love, that is my love expressing itself in maisa. And the same thing is with any thought that I have, any idea that I have, or any feeling that I have. The only way it can express itself in this world is through the mediums of machshava and dibur and maisa.
So what machshava kemaase? You think about something like you did it.
You're asking what it means machshava kemaisa.
Right.
Machshava kemaisa is a spiritual idea, which means that that when you have a good thought to do something, Hashem will reward you as if you did that act. That doesn't mean that machshava and maisa are actually the same thing. That's on a very simple level. And in chapter 16, the Alter Rebbe is going to give a much deeper understanding in machshava tova kadosh baruch hu mitzaref ala maisa. But we all understand machshava isn't maisa. So whatever it means, it doesn't mean literally that machshava is maisa. And these are called garments. And the analogy, the mashal of garments is very interesting. We spoke about this a few shiurim ago. On the one hand, usually we can look at a person's garments and we can see it, and we can tell a lot about the person. We can see a lot about the person. We give examples. A person's dressed in a police officer's uniform, a doctor's dressed in a doctor's uniform, etc. But it's not only in terms of uniforms, but also, and obviously a Yid is dressed in a Yiddish uniform, but it's more than that. You look at a person and are they dressed, are they kempt, or are they unkempt, are they dressed stylish, you can tell a lot about a person through their clothing, because a person expresses themselves through their clothing, which is why clothing is such an important and big part of the lives of so many people. However, if anyone over here has ever served on a jury, so on a criminal case, so you can have a defendant who's a lowlife, but they make sure they dress him in a very, very nice suit, and he looks like a business executive, and he's sitting over there in the defendant's box. The point is, because clothing, the way a person's dressed absolutely impacts the way that we evaluate a person. But as we all know, those clothing, that isn't the person. So that's the interesting thing about clothing. On the one hand, clothing usually does express who a person is, but it doesn't necessarily have to. You could put on clothing that doesn't fit you. You could put on clothing that doesn't fit you physically, that's too large or too small. Or you could put on clothing which don't fit you spiritually. In other words, they don't really express who you are. I mean, I can come wearing a t-shirt and jeans, right? We can all do that.
We have an expression: clothing makes the man.
Clothing makes the man. But that's true somewhat, but not completely. Right, but it's not. In other words, it's definitely true that clothing makes the man. Well, what does that really mean? That means when you look at a person and the way the person dresses, and if a person doesn't dress properly, people are going to make assumptions about you. You have to dress appropriately. But at the same time, as we all know, you can have someone who's a lowlife putting on clothing of a highly respected, can look highly respected, or vice versa. And the same thing is in terms of the spiritual levushim, the spiritual garments of the neshama, of machshava dibra maisa. Normally, the way we behave is a reflection, it's a levush, it reflects who we are. If I love someone, normally my actions towards that person will be loving actions. If I detest another person, usually that will be evident also in the way I speak about the person, the way I think about the person, and the way that I act towards the person. But that's not necessarily always the case. It's not. Because for whatever reason I choose, I could act in a way which is inconsistent with the way I'm thinking or I'm feeling for whatever reason. I could choose to say something I don't really feel and I don't really believe for whatever reason. And theoretically, if I wanted to, in my mind, I could sit and as a mantra in my mind, I could be thinking to myself, 2 plus 2 is 5, 2 plus 2 is 5, 2 plus 2 is 5. We can do that, right? You can think that in your head. Because it's a levush, a garment doesn't necessarily have to reflect that which is going on inside. So that is the little tension when it comes to levushim. On the one hand, they usually do reflect the person who's bearing them, but they don't always have to. And the same is true when it comes to the neshama, that the neshama, the essence of the neshama are its thoughts and its feelings. Not its thoughts. It's see, that's a little tricky part which I don't want to get into so much. The difference between seichel and machshava. Seichel is the essence of who I am. Machshava is a garment. Machshava are thoughts. Seichel are my ideas, my perceptions, the way I see the world, the way I understand things. That's my seichel. So usually my thoughts, speech, and actions will be a reflection of my essence of who I am, which is my ideas and my feelings, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so. Without further ado, let's look inside a little. Perek Daled. In addition to the essential character traits of the neshama, which we spoke about in last chapter, every nefesh elokis also has 3 garments. Shehem, and they are machshava dibur u'maisa, thought, speech, and action. And because over here we're talking about the neshama, we're talking about the garments of the neshama. So what are those garments? Those would be the thoughts, speech, and action shall tayag mitzvahs HaTorah of the 613 mitzvahs. Is when a person does an action, does all the mitzvahs which require action, and uses his speech, he's involved in speaking about all the 613 mitzvahs and their halachas. And in thought, he works to understand everything he couldn't grasp and everything he could understand. In all 4 parts of the Torah, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Soid. When a person does this, then all the 613 components of the neshama, Mulubashim, are invested b'tayag mitzvahs HaTorah, in the 613 commandments, mitzvahs of the Torah.
So what's every nafsha? What is every nafsha? You have a vorum. How's that related?
Right. The neshama, even though that we spoke in the last perek that the neshama is divided into 10 components, but if you want to further subdivide, every neshama is comprised of 613 components, which correspond. This is a primary theme in the teachings of the Arizal, that every neshama has 613 parts, and every part is related to a specific mitzvah, and every single neshama has to do every single one of the 613 mitzvahs in order to rectify all the 613 parts of the neshama. And that's also the reason for Gilgulim, for reincarnation, that if a person did not fulfill all 613, then that neshama, or a spin-off of part of the neshama, has to come back down to fulfill the rest of the 613 mitzvahs. Right. It's actually, that's the word that Arizal uses, 613 nitzutzim, sparks. But in here he refers to them in anthropomorphic terms as the 613 limbs of the neshama. Sorry?
If you're not a kohen, you can't do.
So, yeah, that's technical questions. You want to know if a person is a kohen, how that works.
Or if you're not living in Eretz Yisrael.
If you're not living in Eretz Yisrael, well, first of all, that's why they're Gilgulim. You're right. Because I can't do every single mitzvah, so therefore I come down, almost every neshama comes down numerous times, so they can have, in numerous circumstances, in order to be able to fulfill all the mitzvahs. And in fact, that's also given for one of the reasons for Tchias HaMesim. So if a neshama was never able to do those mitzvahs which are totally in Eretz Yisrael, so all the neshamas can come back for that also. There are certain mitzvahs, for example, when it says the mitzvahs of the king, that the melech is moitzi, all Klal Yisrael. And there are certain, husbands and wives, that's one neshama, so they do mitzvahs. So you don't have to come down as a man and a woman to do both mitzvahs. That is one. It's a little tangential. It's not really related to what we're talking about, but since we're talking about the 613 parts of the neshama, so it's somewhat relevant, right? So when a person, the point over here is that when a person uses their machshava and their dibur and their maisa to do Torah mitzvahs, so then what you're doing is all 613 parts of your neshama are invested in the mitzvahs of the Torah. So what we have over here is interesting is that the neshama, in order for it to do Torah mitzvahs, it needs the levushim.
Well, it's like a conduit. You can use the word conduit. To have access to do the mitzvah.
Right. So this is going to be the interesting conflict in our Perek over here. What's more important, the person or the garments? If you're going and if someone's going to need an operation, would you rather the doctor in jeans, or would you rather the janitor wearing the doctor's robe? Obviously the doctor in jeans, right? Because the garments are very important, but they're not. That's not who you are. You're not your garments. Your garments are how you express yourself. They're not who you are. By way of example, let's say we hired over here the Rabbi Talbert hired, and sitting next to me was a professional mime. A mime is someone who copies, right? A mimic?
A mime is
okay. But someone's sitting here and is mimicking me. Every move of my hand, every time I take a drink, and every word that I'm saying. And as I'm sitting here, he's copying me exactly. In machshava you can't copy unless he also happens to be a mind reader. But let's say theoretically, even he was able to copy my thoughts. In other words, what percentage is he me at that time?
100%.
0%. 0%. The fact that I can copy you doesn't make me you. Why? Because I'm copying the levushim. You're moving your hand like this, I'm going to move my hand like this. You're going to say these words, I'm going to say. But those words are only a reflection of something much deeper. And that's you. That I can't copy.
How these words were formulated.
What makes you unique from me? In other words, you can have 20 people and they're all wearing next to each other and they're all wearing the same clothing. Are they the same people? No.
Different. Yeah.
All different. What makes you different than me? I could say the same words, you can copy my words. That doesn't make you me. What makes you is that you're unique in your midas. I can never have the same feelings that you have. You can't even teach me to have them. It's impossible. I can never think the way you think, understand things the way, because that's what makes every single person unique. There is me. The way I behave, the way I speak, and and even the words that I use in my mind, those are all expressions of me. So in terms of importance, and in terms of centrality, what's more important, me or my garments? What's the question? Of course, me.
But you can't do any of the Taryag mitzvahs without.
But the neshama without the levushim can't do the Taryag mitzvahs. Can't do the mitzvahs. Without the garments.
Those are the means of doing the mitzvahs.
No, what did we have? It was last week we spoke about, and Perek Gimel. The neshama can love Hashem because that's midos. It can understand the greatness of Hashem. But that's not mitzvahs. It's not mitzvahs. And Yiddishkeit, as we all know, is not about loving Hashem and understanding Hashem. Those are components of Yiddishkeit. But someone,
It's also a mitzvah.
it's a mitzvah also, but someone who sits in a monastery and he's involved in contemplation and love, that's not a yid. I mean, the person might be a yid, but I'm saying is that's not
Mitzvah.
what Yiddishkeit is all about. And which leads us to the question, just 1 second, why are levushim so important? In other words, the Yiddishkeit seems to be all about the levushim. Why?
Because you can't do nothing without it.
So who said you have to do?
You have it. You said the neshama needs to be, you need a tikkun in the neshama.
Just 1 second, you want to...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
It
Sorry about
seems,
that.
based on our discussion, it seems that nafkamina is olam haba, olam haza. In olam haba, we always say there's no mitzvot. It's just the neshama taking in connecting to Hashem.
Basking in the radiance of Hashem. And olam haba.
Mitzvos, just somehow, when we've never seen it, we can't really, but we have the idea that in this world we do mitzvos to connect to Hashem. In the next world, without mitzvos, somehow the neshama still can have an intimate relationship with Hashem. That seems to be the difference from what we're saying.
He seems to have a point here. Because you can't do any mitzvahs.
Do you have the whole... Do you have...
When you're dead.
Do you have the whole Perek Dalet over there in your copies, or is just part of the Perek?
We have the whole Perek Dalet.
Okay, so page test, second to top line.
Levushim.
V'lachein amru, yafa sha'achas b'tshuva ma'asim tovim be'elam hazeh mekol chai elam haba. I don't want to talk about this right now, because this is what we're talking about later on in the Perek. But no, the connection that we make with Hashem is over here. In fact, in Gan Eden and Olam Haba, the only thing that we're doing over there is enjoying the connections with Hashem that we created over here through our mitzvahs.
So we got to do something in this world.
So it's all about the levushim. It's all about, but why? Why does Hashem and Torah mitzvahs make levushim? Let me give another example. We're talking about our relationship with Hashem over here. We know in B'sari Echza Likah, one of the best examples that we can use for our relationship with Hashem is the Shlomo HaMelech. He wrote a whole sefer Shir Hashirim. The relationship between the husband and wife is a metaphor for the relationship. In other words, Shlomo HaMelech thought, what's the greatest love over here in this world? And he applied that to Hashem. Obviously, our love for Hashem is on a much greater level, but that was the metaphor he found. And in our relationships, using the marriage relationship as an example, we have both of these ideas also. There is the essence of the relationship, which is the feelings that husband and wife share for each other, and which is also the thoughts that the husband, in other words, the respect, the esteem, the way they view each other. And then there's the machshava dibur maisa. There's how they speak to each other, there's how they behave to each other. Those are expressions of the way they think and feel about each other. Now in a relationship, which one is more important? The thoughts and feelings, or the speech and actions?
Speech and actions.
Thoughts
Speech and actions?
and feelings.
Thoughts and feelings.
That's the essence.
Yeah, but you can't
I would
see
say
that
they're
in
both
somebody.
equal, as a matter of fact.
Sorry?
Express it.
I would change, say they're both equal.
They're both equal.
Because if you have good thoughts and feelings, but if you mice them on a low tone, what's the point? It has to be a corroboration.
So what would you think a wife would want more? Would she rather, if given the option, her husband should truly respect and love her, but not give her flowers? Or the husband should give her flowers, but not love and respect her?
The first one.
In fact, 1 second. The flowers are only important if and when
You love her.
they're reflections of the thoughts and feelings. So the thoughts and feelings are definitely primary.
That's it.
In other words, the thoughts and feelings in and of themselves are valuable even without anything else. The flowers, without the thoughts and feelings, are nothing.
But you have to express your thoughts and feelings.
That's true. And
I can't read your mind.
that's correct.
But you have to communicate.
And if a person truly loves and respects, unless the person happens to be in jail, or unless there's some other physical inability, they're going to express it, because that's normal. If you love and you respect, then that expresses itself in your action. But that's the relationship. The relationship isn't the flowers. The relationship is the love and the respect.
But you can't have respect without the...
Because relationship is two people. It's me and who am I? I am my thoughts and my feelings. We've established this before. Who are you? You are your thoughts and your feelings. A relationship is two people getting along. The machshava, dibur, and maisa are tools how we express that. But that's not the essence of the relationship.
No.
How about in Yiddishkeit?
But you can't have a relationship.
Is the essence of our relationship with Hashem our love for Hashem and our understanding of Hashem, or the flowers that we give Him?
Love and
Love and understanding.
Love and understanding?
our love and awe.
Right, you're doing mitzvahs.
So if I do a mitzvah without avas Hashem, is that like giving my wife flowers without loving? Yeah? So that I may as well not do it.
מתוך שלא לשמה יצא לשמה.
Do it.
No, it's, you
No,
get credit,
read
but it's
that.
all the shema.
All that means is, in other words, if you're arguing it the way you're arguing it, that yes, this itself that I'm doing is worthless, but keep on doing it because maybe one day you'll get it right. Is that correct? If I do a mitzvah without ava, it's worthless? And its only value is that what? Is that if I keep on doing it, one day I'll get to do it right? No. A mitzvah is a mitzvah. So here we have a very interesting tension between what is most important over here. Is it the essence of the neshama, which is who I am, or the tools the machshava dibur maisa, through which it does Torah mitzvahs? And that's what we're going to explore as we go on in this parak. And of course, maybe you heard the story, the joke about this. This rabbi is approached talking about marriage by a husband, and he sits for half an hour by the rabbi, and he unloads about his wife, complaining at how terrible she is and how lazy she is and how awful a wife she is. And the rabbi is sitting and nodding. You're right, I'm so sorry. I feel for you, you're right. Guy leaves, half an hour later the wife shows up. And she sits for half an hour, unloading about her husband, how awful he is, and how mean he is, and how insensitive he is, and unsupportive he is. And the rabbi is nodding along. You're right, I'm so sorry.
Shamish then says to
And the wife turns to the rabbi and says, what just happened? You said he's right, and you said she's right. How can they both be right? That's impossible. So the rabbi says, you know what, you're right.
Right too.
So by the time we finish this page, we're going to see there's... In other words, they're both very important, but we're going to learn the context of why this is important, why that's important. And this will give us a much better understanding of our avodah over here in this world. But let's keep on going inside. We're holding where it says ubepratus. I think it's 7 lines from the top of the perek, page ches. Ubepratus, more in detail.
Good.
Bechines Chabad shebenafshoy. The seichel, the person's mind, the mind of the nefesh shalukis, mulubashos, the chachma bina and das are all invested b'asagas haTorah, in understanding Torah. Shehu masik b'pardes, the mind understands in all 4 parts of Torah, kifi yechilos asagasai, to the best of its ability, to the best that it can comprehend. V'sheish nesmasi l'mayla, and also according to its sheirish above, because we know different neshamas are naturally attuned, right, to different parts of Torah. The famous story about the Alshich. The Alshich lived in Tzfas at the same time as the Arizal. And anyone who ever looks at an Alshich knows the Alshich was a master Talmud Chacham and very big in Drush. And he wanted to learn Soid, he wanted to learn also Kabbalah. So he was a big knacker in town, he's the Alshich after all. So he asked the Arizal if you privately tutor him. And of course, the Arizal said yes. Zegt the Alshich. So they sat down, and every single time they started learning, as soon as the Rizal started teaching, the Alshich fell asleep. And after a few times, the Rizal told them, and the Alshich obviously felt very bad. The Rizal told them, relax, your neshama is from Olam HaDrush. Your neshama is a shaykh is the drush, so don't be upset. The Rebbe once said this over by Fabrengen, the story. And the Rebbe said, the Rebbe was talking that there are people who are sleeping by the Fabrengen also. People, Shabbos afternoon or it was late at night, and people used to fall asleep. Human beings are human beings. So the Rebbe says, at first I thought that maybe it's because their neshama didn't have a shaykhis, but then I see, I'm talking pshat and they're sleeping. I'm talking drush and they're sleeping. Talking remes and they're sleeping. I'm talking soid and they're still sleeping. So it can't be that that's the reason for the sleeping. So Akapanim, the mind is involved in Torah, understanding Torah to the best of its ability, and according to the Shirish and Neshama, the source of the Neshama Lamayla. That's the Chachma Bin and Das, the mind of the person, the mind of the Seichel of the Neshama. V'hamidos, and the Midas of the Neshama, Shehein, which they are Yira v'Ava v'Anfeyan, fear of Hashem and love of Hashem, and the extensions thereof. V'Tildeseyan, and their offsprings, Mulabashes, B'kiyim Mitzvahs, B'maisa U'B'dibur. They are involved. The midas, the emotions, are invested in doing mitzvahs, in action and in speech. Shu Talmud Torah Shneger Kulam. That's the mitzvah of actually learning Torah, which is, we know, Chaim Heim L'Meitzayim. The mitzvah is that you're supposed to say the words of Torah, and if you think words of Torah, you don't have to make Berachos HaTorah according to Halacha.
You can think it.
Sorry?
You can think it.
You can think it, the Berachos HaTorah. And why is that? Why are we saying here that the midos are invested in the mitzvahs? So the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that we know that of the 613 mitzvahs, ahava, love for Hashem, is the impetus for the 248 mitzvahs haseh. And fear of Hashem is what keeps us away from the 365 mitzvahs leisasa. So that is the function of the midos. The function of the midos is to give us chayis and to animate those mitzvahs inside. Ki ha'ava, because love for Hashem, he shadish kol ramach mitzvahs is the source of all the 248 positive mitzvahs. Umimena hinam shachis, they come from the ava. Ubil ada, and listen to these words very closely. Without ava, eilam kiyum amiti. It's not as if they're being done with an emes. Ki mekayman be'emes wa'ev v'shem Hashem. To do a mitzvah be'emes is to love Hashem, v'chafes l'davka be'emes, and a desire to connect Hashem at the emes. It's impossible to connect Hashem. The only way to connect Hashem is through doing the 248 mitzvahs, for they are, as referred to in the Zohar, the 248 limbs of the king. Commissioner Zbarba Makamacher is explained elsewhere. Why are mitzvahs referred to as the limbs of Hashem? And obviously there's the 248 association. But what's the deeper connection between mitzvahs and limbs? So what is a limb? What constitutes, and it's a silly question, but what constitutes a limb? If I were to take a pen and I were to crazy glue it right here, do I have 249 limbs?
No.
Just because it's attached to me? No. So what is a limb? A limb is something which is alive. It's not only that it's connected to me, but it's alive. Alive means that it actually draws chayis. It draws vitality and life from my neshama. So a human being's 248 limbs are 248, here you might want to say, conduits or vessels for the life of the neshama. Hashem's 248 limbs means how do we draw down the chayis and vitality of Hashem? How do I connect to Hashem? There are 248 limbs. In other words, every mitzvah is a limb, that by doing this mitzvah is like a magnet, and it attracts, it brings down the chayis from Hashem and allows me to connect to Hashem. So if I love Hashem and I desire to connect to Him, then automatically I'm going to do the mitzvahs. Why? Because the only way to connect to Hashem is through doing the mitzvahs. So how do I actualize my love for Hashem? Through doing mitzvahs. And that's why love is the source for the 248 mitzvahs. Because love is a desire to connect. How do I connect? Through mitzvahs. And Alter Rebbe's words are very powerful. Without that ein lam kima miti, it's not as if I am truly doing the mitzvahs. What does that mean? That means that if Joe Schmo gives his wife flowers, but he doesn't love her, is he really giving her the flowers?
No.
He's not. He's going through the motions. His hands are doing it. But is he really invested in this? Is he doing it? Or is it his levushim, or just Maisa alone? It's an empty suit. To use, for using the expression of levushim, of garments. If I'm doing a mitzvah but I don't love Hashem, that means I am elsewhere. I am where my love is. I am where my feelings are. So to do a mitzvah with an emes means to love Hashem. If I'm missing in that love of Hashem, the mitzvah was done, but I wasn't there. It's an interesting idea.
How do you acquire the emotion of love?
That we already discussed in last week's parak.
Everything's
No, not next week. I said last week. That was das, thinking of the greatness of Hashem, and through das acquiring a love. But then, how does that love actually?
How you connect it with the mitzvah then?
Well, if you love, how does one's love for his wife connect to buying flowers? It's an obvious extension. If I love Hashem, it's a byproduct. If I love Hashem, I'm going to do a mitzvah. I could do a mitzvah without love, but then
the love goes before the doing the mitzvah. Because
ideally,
the mitzvah is like a byproduct.
Ideally, you're saying that love comes before the mitzvah. Ideally, that's correct. The ideal mitzvah is one that flows from love. Chas v'shalom to say, however, that you should wait till you love before you do a mitzvah. No, because that's very yes. The ideal mitzvah is one that's preceded by love. That doesn't mean to say if I'm not feeling loving, right, go back to the analogy of a relationship.
Well, using that as a
Comes Friday, comes Friday afternoon, and you're not feeling very loving to your wife. Do you still bring flowers?
Sure.
There you go. However, is that the ideal giving of flowers?
Nope.
No.
It's not the optimum.
That's not the optimal. But the same thing is in terms of mitzvahs, the same thing with the Eibishter. The ideal mitzvah is one where I am fully invested in it, and that means that I have Ava for Hashem.
How about the schar mitzvah?
No. Ava for the schar of the mitzvah.
Schar mitzvah is as opposed to doing the mitzvah without ava, as opposed to doing the mitzvah with ava. Is to get the same schar? Is the reward the same? Or it's just you get a lesser...
Who's talking about reward here?
I'm wondering.
The Nefesh Elokis doesn't care about reward. Nefesh Bahamas wants reward. Nefesh Elokis wants to connect to Hashem.
I understand, but
so when we get to Nefesh Bahamas, we'll talk about reward. The neshama doesn't think about that. The neshama, its biggest reward is schar mitzvah mitzvahs. It's connection to Hashem. That's all it wants. It's all it wants. What?
That is the reward.
Yeah. It loves Hashem. Its biggest reward is to be able to do a mitzvah and connect to the one that it loves.
Schar mitzvah mitzvah.
Yeah, absolutely. Schar mitzvah mitzvah.
yeah, it's in Pirkei Avos.
There you go. So, that is when it comes to Ava. Oi, or Yira Pnimis, or where are we? Vahayira Yisherish L'Shasa Leisasa. And fear of Hashem is the shaders for the 365 mitzvahs Leisasa. Ki Yari Limre de Melech Malchem Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now why does someone avoid doing mitzvahs? Because the person fears to rebel against Hashem. Not he fears the punishment. Because that's the Nefesh Bahamas fears punishment. Nefesh Elokis doesn't fear punishment. The Nefesh Elokis fears the Avera. Yiras Chet doesn't mean Yiras Oynish. Yiras Chet means that I recognize that when I do an Avera, I'm disconnecting from Hashem, and that is what I fear. So when a person fears Hashem, they don't do mitzvahs because they fear to do something that's going to impinge chas v'shalom on their relationship with Hashem. Going back to human relationships. If a person does something which is detrimental to the relationship, so what's the biggest punishment? What's there to be worried about? The consequence of it? What do you mean the consequence?
Severance.
The severance, that which you did, is if you care about the relationship, that's the punishment. That's one level of yira. Or yira pnimis mizu. Then there's a yira which is even higher, or more. She doesn't use the word higher, which is more deeper. You're ashamed of the Eibishter's greatness. You're pushing embarrassed to do something bad. Imagine you're sitting with a newspaper, sitting and listening to Chais, and you have a ball game on your television, and into your room walks a big tzaddik. How tzaddik that you are? What would you feel like at that moment? Sitting with a beer, newspaper, watching the game. These aren't even the worst Avedas in the world. We can, what would you feel like? You'd be looking for a hole to crawl into and to hide from shame. That's the
not dressed properly.
What, right? That the ultimate yira of Hashem, not your fear, not that you fear punishment, but not even. You're embarrassed. You're embarrassed. How can I do? The Eibishter is watching me. How can I do an Avera? It's not about the consequence. When the tzaddik walks in, when you're worried that what he's gonna curse you and you're gonna die. It's not. You're not worried about the consequence. It's. The Kadam and Chava, when they recognized they were naked. Exactly. That's the ultimate level of Yira, is when you're aware of the all-encompassing presence of Hashem, and you'd be embarrassed to do an Avera. Embarrassed. How can I?
How do you come to that Madrega if everything's Hastoris Tony?
How do you come to Madrega? I'll give you the same answer I gave you before.
It's a very beautiful disappearing
You're saying if the Eibishter disappears, and how can you come to that Madrega? We spoke about that last week. That's what Das is. That's Taka what Rabbi Yechim and Zakkai said, as we spoke about last week. Alavai, you should have fear for Hashem like you have fear Kabasar Adam, and through Das we can achieve that also. And it's hard. It's hard, but
you have Katnei HaSeichel, Katnei HaDas.
Katnei HaSeichel, Katnei HaDas. So first of all,
you don't got the Caleb.
you're saying that you have a small mind. How do you know? You tried it ever? You ever tried his Baidanos? So first of all, you don't know.
I've never been trained.
And if you really are with small seichel, Alter Rebbe and Tanya, we're going to talk about different remedies for that also. But you can't decide that until you've tried it. Don't underestimate yourself also. It's easy to do that also.
It's an abstract thing that you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about.
It's abstract until you make it real. And no one can do that for you. Okay, we're moving on.
All right.
So a person is embarrassed to do to do anything which is evil in Hashem's eyes, called Ti'avas Hashem B'Shasane. All the abominations which Hashem hates. And what is the abomination that Hashem hates? Him haklipos seter achra, are the forces of klipa seter achra, terms which we'll discuss in Mitzvahs later on, Tanya. Asher yinikasam, where do they get their energy from? Where do they get their nourishment from? From people down here in this world. V'achizasam boy, and how do they attach themselves to a person to receive energy? Hu b'shasam mitzvahs leisasa through averis. So when a person realizes that every time you do an Avera, you're giving energy to the klippas which are an abomination to Hashem, which Hashem detests, then you'd be embarrassed to do an Avera. So what do we have over here at Devaila? What did we say? To summarize, we said that the neshama, the essence of the neshama is the seichel and the midas, my ideas, my understandings, and my feelings. What I think and what I feel, that really is who I am. What makes me, not you, and not you, not you. We all have noses and we all have eyes. But what makes me, me, is my feelings and my ideas. And then this is how I express myself. And the neshama, the expressions of the nefesh elokis is through the mitzvahs, through these levushim. And when the neshama expresses itself fully in machshava dibar ma'aseh, it does all 613 mitzvahs, and all the components of the neshama, all my seichel and all my midas, are invested in the levushim and through them in the mitzvahs of the Torah. V'hinei, says the Alter Rebbe, and here's where we're going to get to the crux of it. V'hinei, shleisha levushim elu, ma'teira mitzvisaha, these three levushim of Teira mitzvahs, because we're talking here about the levushim of the Nefesh Elokis, the garments of the Nefesh Elokis. How does the Nefesh Elokis express itself? It's love for Hashem, it's fear for Hashem, it's understanding of Hashem. It's through the mitzvahs of the Teira. Even though they're only garments. Im kol zeh, still. Gavha v'gadla malasam le'ein kates v'soif. They are infinitely higher and greater and more important. Al mailas nefesh ruach u'neshama atzman, over the essence of the neshama. It's the opposite of the way it is. This is where the mashal and the nimshal diverge and take different paths. In human relationships, as we demonstrated beforehand, in human relationships, the most important thing is the seichel and the midas. My thoughts, what I think of the other person, and my feelings. Not so in our relationship with Hashem. The opposite there is true. When it comes to our relationship with Hashem, the main thing is the levushim. The main thing is the garments, the main thing is machshava d'ibur ma'aseh. As it says in Zohar, that Hashem and Torah are one. Pirush, what does that mean? The Torah is the chachma, the wisdom, and the ratzon, the desire, the will of Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. VaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chveidei. Sorry, the Torah is chachmas yirtzeni Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, VaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chveidei v'atzmei kul echad. Hashem's chachma and Hashem's ratzon is completely one with Hashem Himself. This is something which we explored in Perek Beis in Tanya. Why? Ki hu hayidei v'hu hamaduchu. Hashem, He is the knower and He is the knowledge. In other words, Hashem, as the Rambam says, is absolute chulu commission is bar le'il, as explained earlier b'Shem HaRambam. Hashem is absolutely one with His chachma. V'after HaKadosh Baruch Hu nikra ein soif, and even though the Eibishter is absolutely infinite, and the Eibishter's greatness knows no intellectual boundary. You cannot begin to conceive of it. And there is no mind, there is no thought that can begin to grasp Hashem. There's no thought, there's no human intellect that can grasp. Not only you can't grasp Hashem, we can't grasp Hashem's will, we can't grasp Hashem's wisdom. Kediksiv, as the pasuk says, in chekel tfunasai, there is no end to Hashem's wisdom. Uksiv, and the pasuk says, hacheker aleikatimtza, if you're going to investigate Hashem, will you find Him? Uksiv, and the pasuk says, kilei machshaveisem machshaveisechem, Hashem's thoughts aren't our thoughts. So the question on that is that what? If Hashem is unlimited, Hashem is infinite, and no mind can grasp Hashem. At the same time, we're saying that what? That Hashem is one with His Torah. And here's the riddle. But we understand Torah. How can we understand Torah if the infinite Hashem is one with Hashem, with His chachma and His ratzon, and Hashem's chachma and ratzon are also infinite? How do we learn Torah? Al zeh amru, regarding this, Chazal tell us, b'makim shata meitzah gdulasi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sham ata meitzah an v'sinusay. There where you find Hashem's greatness, there you find His humility. In other words, where you find Hashem's greatness, what's Hashem's greatness? His wisdom. There you find also His humility. V'tzimtzem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem contracted ritzoyne v'chachmasei, His ratzon, His desire, and His wisdom b'tayag mitzvah Torah, in the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, u'b'ilcheseyan and their halachas, u'b'tzirufia esias tanach v'drashiseyan, and in the way the words of Tanakh are composed, and all the different drashas of Tanakh, Sheba Agadis, Madrashi Chachamenu Zal, everything in the Medrash, Bichdei, in order Shekol HaNeshama Ruach V'Nefesh Shebegufa Adam Tuchal HaSigan Bedaita, so that every neshama should be able to understand it. Kol ma she'efshar l'kayim ben. Sorry, where are we? L'tuchal asikan b'daita, should be able to understand it in their mind. U'l'kayimon kol ma she'efshar l'kayim ben b'maisa diber machshava, and to do whatever is possible from Torah in action, speech, and thought. And through that, the whole neshama is invested in Torah mitzvahs. I know we read a lot, but what's Alter Rebbe saying here? What he's saying here is that ultimately, the notion that we can connect to Hashem is ludicrous.
He's infinite and we're finite.
And he's infinite, we're finite. Just try to imagine, anyone here in the medical profession, anything over here? No? But there are probably billions of different bacteria running around in our bodies. So imagine one of the bacteria is thinking to itself one day, this guy that I'm inhabiting, good guy, I want to have a relationship with him. What can I do? If I'm a very, very good bacteria and I behave very, very appropriately and properly, maybe he'll pay attention to me and he'll start liking me. In a similar way, but not actually, because it's not a real comparison, because the bacteria and us, I'm not infinitely greater than the bacteria. It's in other words, there's a scale. I'm on one end of the spectrum, it's on the other end of the spectrum. Hashem is infinitely removed from us. There is no spectrum, there is no scale. It's not as if we're here, we're there. There is nothing. We're going to have a relationship with Hashem. How ridiculous is that? We're nothing. What did the Eibusher do? What did Hashem do? Hashem took himself and he contracted it into Torah and Mitzvahs. Ahava dechekes asabasa. With love, in order that we should be able to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, and thereby literally connect to Hashem and grasp Hashem. It's unfathomable to think this chus when we sit and we study Tanya, or any sefer in Torah for that matter. If we for a moment stop to think what's going on over here, this is the infinite wisdom of Hashem, which Hashem took and He compressed into these finite words, which we're now ingesting within ourselves, and we're connecting with Hashem's wisdom. If that itself doesn't bring to Yira, to an incredible awe and reverence and love for Hashem, that's what He did by Matan Torah. Anoichi, the Gemara says, the word Anoichi, from the Aser Sadibris, the Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos, is a Rashi Tevis, is an acronym for the words Ana Nafshis Kisavis Yahavis. I myself wrote myself into the Torah and gave it away to you. Hashem wrote himself into the Torah and gave it to us. As it says in the Zohar, Oisi atem loichim. We're literally grasping Hashem. But here's the thing. I could sit and love Hashem all day, it means nothing. Because my love can't reach Hashem. I could sit and think about Hashem all day, it means nothing. But when I use the tools that Hashem gave me, the Torah and the mitzvahs, that's how I connect to Hashem. And that's why the human relationship analogy, just 1 second, that's where the comparison ends. When I'm dealing with another person of the same stature, of the same level, so yes, what's most important in the relationship is not the flowers that I'm giving. The flowers are an expression of the relationship. The flowers don't make the relationship, they're an expression of the relationship. By Hashem, the flowers are the relationship.
This is impossible to relate any other way.
The only way to relate to Hashem is by Torah and Mitzvah. So here's the amazing thing. When I love Hashem, and that love expresses itself in doing a mitzvah, the love connects itself to Hashem through the mitzvah. Usually, in other words, in human terms, how do I connect to another person? When I love another person, that's the connection. There is the connection. The connection is a connection. The bonds are bonds of love. It's not bonds of roses. It's bonds of love, and the roses are an expression of that love. By Hashem, the relationship is the actions, is the Torah and mitzvahs. And if I want my love to be part of the relationship with Hashem, that love has to express itself in a mitzvah. When I love Hashem and that causes me to put on tefillin, when I love Hashem and that causes me to give tzedakah, then that love is connected to Hashem also. But if I sit in my room and I love Hashem, that's nothing. That's just me.
So what's with the vaktim b'ma'asav? How is relate to what you're saying?
I don't see how that relates one way or another. In other words, I don't see how that's
So in terms of dafka,
to connect to Hashem, right?
that's a mitzvah saseh.
And how do we connect to Hashem? What does it say? Through the mitzvahs. Through doing, yeah. Another few lines in Tanya. And therefore, therefore, Torah is compared to water. As the Gemara says, just like water goes from a higher place to a lower place. That's the nature of water. In other words, I'm putting my watch over here, and it's staying on the table. My hat is staying. The safer is staying. But if I poured the water on the table, it wouldn't stay. It would find a place to go down to. The same thing is kachatera yarda memakim kaveda. The Torah descends from its place of glory, which is where by Hashem, where it's absolutely infinite. Shiratzayne v'chachmasa is barach. Torah, it starts out as Hashem's ratzon and chachma. Ve'iraisa kutchabrichu kulachad, where it's absolutely one with Hashem. V'les machshava tfisa beklal. It starts off in a place where no mind can grasp it. Umishama, from there, Nasa v'yarda, it traveled and it went down. B'seiser ha-madregas, and it got hidden in level after level. Madrega madrega, b'shtalshel sa'elim is coming down through the worlds. Ad sheneslapsha b'dvarim gashmi, to the point that Hashem's wisdom and will invested itself in physical things. V'nyani elam haza, things of this world. Shein reiv mitzvah Torah kekulam, most of the mitzvah of the Torah v'chisein and their halachas. U'b'tzirufe esiyas gashmius b'dyoy ala sefer. Hashem's wisdom becomes the letters, the ink on the paper. Esrim v'arba sfarim shebetayr v'yim ksuvim, the 24 books of Tanakh. And what's the point of this all? Why does it come down? Kidei shtei kol machshava tfisa behen, so that every one of us around our table, that our mind can grasp Hashem. And not only can our mind grasp Hashem, but when I do a mitzvah, my action is grasping Hashem. When I say words of Torah, my words are grasping Hashem. And here, but what is the metaphor of water telling us? What is it adding? Water, yes, it goes from a high place to a low place.
It's just a mushroom.
But it doesn't change. The water is the same. And the same thing is in Torah. Yes, the Torah started out in an infinite place until it comes down over here and it talks about machlef para b'chamer. When you learn the Gemara, you talk about, shir shanagach sapara. It didn't start out that way. It didn't start out talking about oxes and it's when, the infinite wisdom of Hashem. But it comes down talking about oxes and cows, and that is Hashem's chachma 100%. It's water, it didn't change. And we're going to see soon. It's like it put on clothing. The king put on clothing. 1 garment, 2 garments, 3 garments. So Hashem's chachma added garments, but it's the king. When we're learning Torah, it's the king. We're connecting with Hashem himself. And this is what happened by Matan Torah. This is what happened by Matan Torah. By Matan Torah, we had Torah beforehand. The others did mitzvahs beforehand. What happened by Matan Torah exactly? What happened by Matan Torah is that those mitzvahs that the others did before Matan Torah, they were nice actions. They weren't the tools that connected them to Hashem, like our mitzvahs are today. By Matan Torah became mitzvah v'oisa. When we became commanded, what that means was that every mitzvah now became a vehicle which connects us to the infinite.
So how did
Hashem.
How did the others connect to Hashem? If the mitzvahs.
So how did the others connect to Hashem? So first of all, they didn't connect on our level. Believe it or not.
They all were prophets. They talked to Rabbi and Shalom. We can't do this.
Okay. By the time we finish, there's two things. There's two things. There's how holy and spiritual you are, and there's your connection to Hashem. And they're two separate things. Meaning, And this we're going to talk about more next class, which is going to be 2 weeks from now.
But just say, if you think of you love God in your room and you contemplate.
So you're a holy person, but you didn't connect to Hashem. So first of all, the obvious, they did have a mitzvah. Mitzvah Smila was the one mitzvah they had, which they're mitzvah. That's number one. But absolutely, the obvious did not reach the level we do when we do a mitzvah. We'll talk about this more next week, Mir Hashem.
So why were they Zaycha to Nevuah?
Because
Yosef and Tzaddik, they had Nevuah. They all were Nevuah.
leave this question. We'll talk about it.
The next week.
But now the pendulum has shifted, and suddenly Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh become very, very important. The garments become extremely important in our relationship with Hashem, because that's how we grasp Hashem. And now suddenly we're going to start asking, 1 second, how important is my seichel and midas? So I don't love Hashem. Who cares? As long as I do the mitzvah, I give the tzedakah. That's my connection.
Yeah, but you said it's the optimum.
It's relative. The greater your love, the more you'll put into doing the mitzvah.
The connection is the same. You give tzedakah, doesn't make a difference. You eat matzah. So what is the importance of seichel and midas? And that we will, Hashem. In other words, because now we have to bring it back and talk about. If you remember, I said there's the you're right, and then you're both right? So we started off talking about Seichel and Midas. Now we moved on talking about Levushim, and next week we'll move back and start talking again about why Seichel and Midas are still very important. Ultimately, this Chassidus Chabad. We're not going to say that Seichel doesn't mean is not important. It's all about Chachma Ben Avdas. But what is the role it plays? If the connection to Hashem is primarily in Mitzvahs Ma'asiyos, what role does my love for Hashem and what role does my Seichel play? That we'll talk about next week, in 2 weeks from now. Next week is Nittel, so there is no class.